of Ain't No Back to a Merry-Go-Round. I'm Michelle Borstein, the religion reporter at the Washington Post, and I'm honored to be in conversation with this evening's panelists. Ilana Trachtman, director and producer, Ain't No Back to a Merry-Go-Round. Rabbi Jonah Pesner, the director of the Religious Action Center of Reform Judaism. And to my right is Reverend Dr. Kelly Brown Douglas of the Washington National Cathedral. So I wanted to just start with like a gut reaction for you guys on the film. What person hit you hardest and why? I guess we'll go with the folks who didn't make the film. There were so many different individual stories in that film. Whether it was, the trembling hand and that handshake, the relationships with, romantic relationships and things like that came out of it. I didn't know if there was any one particular person that you were like,
First of all, is this on? Can you hear me? Okay. I just want to, first of all, to say to Ilana, thank you. Thank you for making this movie. How many years did it take?
10.
So what a blessing that Ilana stayed with this project, allowed this story to be told, and it's an honor to sit next to you. I also want to say to my soul sister, Dr. Kelly Brown Douglas, you and I have been in this work in solidarity a long time, and the excuse to come together and tell a story about this movie, because we've been in this story together for years, and it's an honor to be with you. And if people do not follow Michelle Borstein and read her stuff every day, you should. So this is really, my hand is shaking a little bit right now from the distinction of the panel and the greatness of this film. There's too many to lift up, but there were these moments. The church women who talked about making their hats was such a story of resilience. We were not going to, and I'm quoting and channeling her story, but we were not going to put a brown paper bag on our head to be able to try on a hat, and so we made our own hats. And of course, the visual that you kept bringing us back to, the liberation of the women wearing the hats of their own empowerment, was deeply powerful. The moment of loss by some of the central characters at the end, whose marriages dissolved, whose lives didn't go the way they might have or thought because of the risk that they had taken and the cost to them personally, I think is a reminder to all of us who engage in this work that Jethro says to Moses after Moses gets out of Egypt with 600,000 Israelites, let me reintroduce you to your family. It's a very powerful moment in the biblical text. And there's more, so I'll save the other moments, but there were so many.
yeah.
So I guess I'm next. First of all, I want to echo my thanks for a very important and significant movie. And so the first thing I'll say in gut reaction is that it reminds me of the importance of film, of art in telling a story, especially in these times in which we find ourselves, when we find ourselves not having access to the history. And so you've made a very significant film and shows the significance of that. I just being able to be again with my dear brother, Rabbi Jonah, and it brings me to another thing that stands out for me in the movie, that you and I met. You would always be there doing the work. And it reminds me that that's where you began to build relationships across communities, across differences, or whatever. It's in the work. And you show up there and you know that it doesn't matter the differences that these persons had. You know you're there for the same reason. And you have the same core value. Then I'll end with this. I think I'm with Rabbi Jonah, and that there were so many people and so many moments. But perhaps the thing that continued to echo in my mind is you saw the people who were the anti-protesters, if you will. And if the people who protested for desegregation and equal justice, etc., are still alive, so are many of those others with all of their venom. And I often wonder what has happened to them and what are the messages that they're handing down to their children. And it reminds me of why a movie like this is so important, because somehow you have to interrupt.
We're often holding up the things that are inspiring and sort of the other, not necessarily paying as much attention to the legacy of the other folks that were there. So we have
Michelle, can I just jump in? Because I'm so happy to have the opportunity to respond to that. Although I want to just say, this is a huge moment for me to be able to speak to all of you and to be with Jonah and Kelly and Michelle tonight. So thank you. A little verklempt, isn't there? But I actually do know what happened to many of the counter-protesters, because I just went down every single rabbit hole. And I mean, all the stories, I'm not going to go into all the stories, but I just want to tell you one that still blows me away. So among those counter-protesters in the American Nazi Party, there's a man that appears very often next to George Lincoln Rockwell. His name was John Patsalos. He changed it to John Patler so it would sound more like Hitler. John Patsalos was the prodigal son of George Lincoln Rockwell. He was his favorite. He was the one who was clear would take over, for him someday. Do you know the story? Oh. And at a certain point, John Patler fell out of favor with George Lincoln Rockwell. He was no longer the favorite. And that experience traumatized him. And so several years later, he waited for him outside of a laundromat and he shot him and he killed him. And John Patler went to jail. He shot George Lincoln Rockwell and killed him, yeah. John Patler went to jail for many years, and while he was in jail, his wife divorced him. He went to jail with leaving 2 young kids behind. And those kids grew up not knowing their father. His daughter married an African-American man, has biracial children. And his son, whose name is Nick Patler, became a professor of African-American history. And until recently was teaching at West Virginia State, which is an HSBCU. So,
I'm glad you shared those details with us.
It's a different movie.
Wow.
The sequel's coming.
So the film carries both, obviously these specific stories in a specific moment, but it also brings a lot of current topics to mind, whether it's allies or rifts in the struggle or just, our ability and inability to see each other's humanity. So let's talk for a minute about the specifics of the people in the film in a little more detail. So you have this diverse group of Howard students, some who were very more elite, some who were more on the poor side, and Black neighbors and Jewish neighbors of the park. So what do you think, Reverend Brown Douglas, why do you think this all came together at this time? Do you have a sense of, I think Ilana's point in the movie is this is actually an important moment in history that doesn't necessarily have as much attention as it should. So why do you think that, that these particular players came together the way they did? And does it merit a bigger slice of our story of civil rights?
Yeah, that's interesting question. I think, first of all, when you think of Howard, right, and this protest, as the Howard students initially began to protest at the lunch counters, et cetera, at the drugstore counters, that wasn't the first time that had occurred. Howard, pre-Brown versus Board of Education with first Black Episcopal priest Polly Murray, who attended the law school there, led a campaign. Mordecai Johnson was the president, and so that kind of protest wasn't something new to Howard. And I think one of the things that it suggests, and I was reminded of watching this movie, is that we can often sort of, as I say, expand our visions, but we can't really make paradigm shifts. Those paradigm shifts are generational shifts, so it's no accident, right, that you would begin to see the involvement and really leading the way would be college students, right? And we forget that Martin Luther King Jr. was 26 years old. Right? And so this is a generational paradigm shift of people who are not going to say, oh, we will accept separate but equal, right? As long as it's equal, we'll stay separate. Well, a new generation comes in and no, we aren't going to do that, right? And as was stated in the movie, I think it's often those who are on the underside that began to lead the way in making that shift. So it's no accident that two, not simply minoritized, but oppressed, subjugated, underside, people on the underside, those communities would come together. It is also no accident, it seems to me, because we see that with history, that college students are often the ones that lead us and make the paradigm shift, and we began to think about justice in a new way and approach the battle, the fight, if you will, for justice in a new way.
It was interesting that one of the characters, just to speak about the Howard thing in particular, said, you know, some Howard kids kind of didn't like to say that segregation bothered them. But obviously they were leading this protest, so it would be, that's another movie, right? Is like, is the life on that campus and some kids who were trying to sort of maybe not let it break their spirit, and some kids who are becoming more activist and that kind of thing. And just again to think about the specifics of the movie, Rabbi, you had mentioned, if I remember correctly when we spoke before this, maybe you were talking about not knowing as much about Montgomery County before you moved here. Is that what you said? Or
so I'm gonna get into trouble because how many of you are from Montgomery County? Okay.
Oh my gosh.
I'm not, okay? So I will simply say, not only did I not know the story of Glen Echo, and I became a parent at Sidwell Friends School, so every year their culminating event is a Glen Echo event, and so I would dutifully show up to this thing. It's lovely. Now that I've seen the film, I will take much more seriously the sacredness of that place and the courage and the risk. But apparently the zoning of schools in Bethesda, Maryland, where I live, was not uncomplicated. And I will simply say, because there are many of you that probably lived the history, I have a friend who grew up here whose mother was part of the campaign to desegregate the Montgomery County Public Schools. I inadvertently moved into a district that this person described as the wrong district to be living in if I cared about racial justice and equity. If you want to chat with me later, I'm happy to, but I don't want to offend half the room by saying what district it was. And I didn't do that. I don't know now what really happened. The reason I lift that up is we all live in spaces and neighborhoods with histories and legacies of oppression and injustice and suffering. And I want to hold myself better accountable to know the stories of transformation and the histories that we inherit. I'll give another kind of example of that. I took an incredible class as an undergraduate at Wesleyan University in the economic systems of oppression and racism. And one of the things that Professor Dupuy, who's the professor, who's a brilliant guy, talked about was 2-acre zoning. And I get my first rabbinic pulpit in what turned out to be the richest town in the richest state in the richest country in the world per capita, Westport, Connecticut. And we're driving around with a realtor as we're gonna try and buy our first home. And she said, "You'll be happy to know, Westport proudly has 2-acre zoning." And I turned to my wife and I was like, oh my God, what have we done? So these systems, these legacies, they're there. And part of, I think, holding ourselves accountable to our values is, at minimum, being aware and interrogating what the context is in the places that we live, the choices that we make, the neighborhoods, the schools, etc.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like and maybe this goes without saying, but in Washington, so much of the national is local, that these stories shape us in such profound ways, and any chance we get to sort of fill out our histories.
Michelle, can I add one other, that local is national? So a very important historic footnote in the film that many people in the room may not know, but it's important. When you kept seeing that sign by the counter-protesters, the NAACP is led by a Jew, right? The racist and anti-Semitic trope with the Nazi insignia. They were correct. They were attacking Kivy Kaplan. If you walk, how many of you know the name Kivy Kaplan? Thank you, my friend. How many of you don't yet know the name Kivy Kaplan? If you walk 3 blocks west from here to DuPont Circle, you will see Kivy Kaplan Way, named for the last white Jewish president of the NAACP, of which I sit on the national board. My board seat was held by Kivy Kaplan and then by Rabbi David Saperstein, my predecessor, and now by me. And it's named Kivy Kaplan Way because the embassy-sized building that houses my offices was donated by Kaplan to the Reform Jewish movement, but under the caveat that we would be the hub of the civil rights movement in Washington. Dr. King did not have an office in Washington. The luminaries that you saw, the national figures who came to be in solidarity, they did not have an office in Washington. So the Religious Action Center of Reform Judaism was where some of those luminaries that you saw debated and discussed strategy, and where they drafted the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. A little bit underappreciated tidbit of American history, Jewish history, and African American history that was all captured in that one moment when rightly the counter-protesters said the NAACP is led by a Jew.
Ilana, you said, okay, that you started the film 10 years ago, and I know this will be hard to answer briefly, but how did it turn out differently than when you started with everything that's kind of happened around us? Is it a really different film?
Thanks for that question. That's a really good question. There's sort of 2 answers to it. I mean, artistically, when you're making a film, you shoot one film and then you create another film in the edit room, and that happens every single time I make a film. And that is because, you know, certain people kind of rise up because of the way they are on camera, what they represent, the truths that they speak. There's certain exigencies of like you actually have footage of and you don't. So, you know, when I started out making the film, before I started shooting, I interviewed about 150 people that were connected to the protests, you know, who were there either as infants, you know, all the way up to, you know, Esther, who's now 100. And I didn't know then who would be the main characters. The other side of it is when I started making the film, Obama was president. And it really just seemed like it was a sort of a straight line, you know, of redemption, you know, that started at Glen Echo. And, you know, then we got somebody else. And, well, and then the film, you know, to me became important to remind everybody where we were so recently and how precarious it all is. And, you know, and when Charlottesville happened, it was like, you know, originally when I saw the footage of the Nazis, it was shocking, right? Like that there were Nazis in Montgomery County, and this is like a decade before Skokie. And then, you know, you see Charlottesville, and it's the same thugs, it's the same, you know, it's the same people. And then, I mean, I live in Philadelphia, so, you know, we were very proud of the grassroots and mobilizing in order to get Biden elected, and then it felt like it was really important to talk about grassroots mobilization in the film and how that worked. And I finished the film in September, and of course we all knew what happened after that. So, I don't know, I guess all by way of saying the film definitely changes as you make it, but I think also the significance of it sort of keeps moving. And, you know, I certainly hope that we're in a different place a year from now and 50 years from now, and it will mean something else.
So I wanted to ask the clergy about, you know, just to pull out, you know, from the very specifics of the people in that film and say, okay, what do we think of today when we see it? And obviously at the core of it are these relationships between African Americans and Jews. And, you know, the film ended with sort of try to remember the closeness of these people and the importance of them these groups to one another. And this is a challenging, more challenging moment, you know, especially around the war in the Middle East. And I was just wondering how the two of you think of that when you see the movie and you're thinking about the actual relationships that you're sort of nurturing and encouraging and the justice seeking you're doing. How do you think about that?
You keep asking easy questions. I think about it. Well, let me take something from the film that somebody said and then build on that. I can't remember now which person said it, but perhaps one of the black women said it. And that was, you know, we wanted to go to the park.
We weren't focused on integrating with you, we just wanted what was fair.
Right, we wanted what was fair, right? And someone else from one of the Jewish women also said, you know, their kids were going to the park, they went to the park. And to me, it reminded me of this very just simple thing if we could live by, right? That which you would not want withheld from yourself, don't withhold from another. And then go about creating a world in which you do not withhold from another that which you would not want withheld from yourself. Now, if we can start there, which means that we have to recognize the sacred humanity of everybody that has breath. If we can start there, then all of the complexities that our world of injustice brings to us, we can get through, right? Because we respect the sacred humanity of everyone and we utterly refuse. I want to be safe. I want a place to live. Then don't withhold it from another and find a way. And these people did, right? This little act. They said, we are not going to allow to be withheld from another that which we wouldn't want withheld from ourselves. To me, that's my basis, my foundation for getting through these complex times with these complex histories. And I like to say, just hold on. Respect the sacred humanity of the other. So.
Thank you.
Amen. My predecessor before Rabbi Saperstein was Rabbi Dick Hirsch, who marched in Selma with King. And at that occasion, he shared the same theology that Dr. Brown Douglas just shared around the sacredness of every human, and lifted up the rabbinic teaching that I think Dr. Douglas would echo, that we're all created from one human, that original human, in order to teach that no person could say about another person, your ancestor is better than my ancestor, or my ancestor is better than yours. And then the rabbinic midrashic tradition, which we should all, for those of us in this room that are Jewish, as we're getting ready for Rosh Hashanah, the annual commemoration of the creation of the world and the first human, God created that first human from all the four corners of the earth, taking red clay, black loam, white sand, yellow soil, that is to say, all of the colors of the universe, in order to make sure that we understand that the beautiful multiracial tapestry of humanity was intended and sacred by God. So that's the kind of theological underpinning. I also want to say that even within this very focused campaign, it was just to desegregate an amusement park, there was disagreement in the coalition. There was disagreement about tactics, there was disagreement about strategy, there was theological disagreement, there was misunderstanding. It's easy to just point to the radical disagreement of the protesters and the counter-protesters. But social movements are rife with internal disagreement. That's okay. And I'll just close by saying I told the story when we prepared. I've been doing this for 40 years. I'm 56 years old. I became an activist at age 16. And when I was now 42 years because I was 14. I was the social action vice president of my Jewish youth group in New York City. And I got a call from our youth group advisor who had gotten a call from her boss, who had gotten a call from probably David Saperstein in Washington, saying, we have a crisis. Jesse Jackson just called New York Honeytown. We've got to fix the Black-Jewish alliance. Do something. So this shrimpy white Jewish kid from New York called up to the Black church in Harlem that I was aware of, got in touch with their youth group president, and we started doing this whole thing together with our youth group and their youth group. It was good and lovely and fine, but I think sometimes we get distracted by the noise, and every 5 or 7 years I see another headline, no offense, Michelle, but I see another headline, there's a rupture in the Black-Jewish relationship, as if there's some, because there is this profound allyship and affinity and shared history, which we saw right there. It's I've been married also for 30 years. I often have strong disagreements with my wife. That doesn't mean there's a rupture in the relationship. It just means we have a strong disagreement and we've got to get back to one another and talk to each other. And I have to be curious and hear what's happening for you right now in this moment in our relationship that I need to be aware of to bring us back into right relationship, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yes. And I want to say, and one of the things that, first of all, the African American community, just as the Jewish community, is not monolithic, right? And the African American community, just as within the Jewish community, we have a goal of being free and of justice, but there are different routes to get there, and it has always been the case. And the African American community. And I think all of those perspectives are significant, are important. The other thing that happens is we talked about this in sort of pre-conversation, that minoritized communities, right, don't have the privilege of one person says something and it represents everybody.
Amen.
And that isn't the case for the community of people who minoritize and have that privilege. That they don't have, everyone doesn't blame them for something that one person in their community said. It doesn't signify, oh no, there's just big rupture and oh, the community is all falling apart. No, someone thought that and then there are other opinions. And so that's a privilege of power, that's a privilege of whiteness, and that's a privilege of those who are not minoritized. And so our task is to get beneath that, right? And I think that that's the task of faith leaders, of religious leaders, is to show a different way.
And I know you want to move us on, Michelle, but amen to that, yes. And I just want to also lift up 15% of the American Jewish community is not white. Right? We have Black Jews, brown Jews, Asian Jews, Latino Jews, Mizrahi Jews, Sephardi Jews, Jews of all hues. And so if you're a Black Jewish person right now and you're overhearing a conversation about the Black-Jewish relationship as if there's some kind of binary, you're saying, you just erased my experience. And I try to listen, and there's going to be other panels where there will be Black Jews. I know you're doing this every night for the next whatever. There will be Black Jews who will weigh in on what they are seeing and experiencing and how they're living in the current moment that we're living in history. So.
I don't want to, we could obviously spend a week on this topic, but just since you're sitting here and we're talking about our own area, are there specific things that could advance those partnerships, specific issues in our area, specific stories, specific adjustments that could be made to the narrative of Black-Jewish relations? Is there something that can sort of propel that to the next level instead of always bouncing back only to the civil rights movement? Again, I know that's a long, I just didn't want to walk away from that right away. Is there something concrete that comes to mind, when you think about this topic, that I wish we did this or we could do that?
We're gonna wait
You can come back.
Yeah, no, I mean, well, I'll say, like, I was sitting next to my co-congregant at Temple Sinai in DC, which Thursday night is doing a deep training into reparations. The easiest first thing if you're doing, I mean, it is normative, at least in the Reformed Jewish congregations in Washington. So I'm talking about Washington Hebrew Congregation and Temple Sinai DC and Temple Micah. They are doing, and have been doing now for years, racial stamina, racial equity, centering Jews of color. It's being led by a black Jew named Josh Maxey, who's on my board. And that's like not doing the easy stuff first. That's like saying, let's have an honest conversation as a community that benefited from reparations because of the Holocaust and our own experience. Let's have an honest conversation about what reparations would look like in the United States, in Washington, DC, in our own congregations. We have congregations that were built by enslaved labor. So what's the obligation of those congregations to actually confront their past? By the way, you know, when people talk about the rupture of Black-Jewish relations, it's like, think about all of the religious communities that are not doing that work. It's like, it's just interesting that people focus on, you know, this piece and miss all that is happening. But that would be one area I think where there is forward momentum.
Yeah, and this may sound, I don't know, pipe dreamy, but I still believe, yes, all of these conversations are important, right? And we have to have, and not be afraid to have, these difficult, uncomfortable conversations. We have to trust our relationships. We have to trust our history together enough to begin to have hard conversations where we believe that our communities are showing up differently on the other side of issues. Well, let's talk about that, right? The issues that confront us. And then, you know, maybe pipe dreamy, or I say, you show up. You know, there's nothing to me like showing up, right? Sometimes you don't even have the answer, or you don't even know where you stand, but you know that your sibling is hurting, right? And you might not understand, or you might think, oh, well, let's show up. And I think it's in the showing up that real, honest conversations can begin to occur, because, you know, they showed up. So we might disagree a whole lot, but it's okay, we'll work through that. So that to me is the bottom line. Just show up even when you don't know why you're showing up.
Ilana, one of the things that I noticed about the film was just so much nuance. There were so many characters, you know, whether it was the Jewish park owners or the mom who didn't want her kid protesting until she found out there was a Nazi involved, and the woman who talked about, you know, the African American woman who said we weren't necessarily focused on integrating, that we really just wanted what was equal. Anyway, I could go on about that, but I was curious if that was something you kind of were interested in intentionally, even at the end when you're like, oh, and also there's this personal cost. Yeah, whether that just kind of came out because their lives were nuanced, or you were like, I want to show that I don't want to simplify this.
Yes. And no, that was really important. That was really important to me, because, you know, what kind of a story has any resonance if it's just broad strokes? You know, it's like, it's so, I guess it's sort of counterintuitive, but the more specific you get, the closer in you tell the story, the more confined you are to the details of, in this case, you know, one protest, one group of people, one location, one moment in time, the more real it is, and the more we can identify with them, the more it becomes a story that we can enter into. So yeah, I mean, there are other nuances that got stuck on the cutting room floor for sure. But yeah, there were a lot of things that I felt were really important and that I, you know, myself hadn't seen in portrayals of the civil rights movement. You know, like the hormone factor, you know, for example. You know, that's actually
Another movie.
Yeah, I mean, it's another new movie, but I mean, that was part, certainly for the teenagers, that was part of why they were coming every day. Or, you know, the fact of bored housewives. And I'm not to take away anything from them, but everyone does things for very complicated reasons.
Yeah, and even the, I'm just thinking of even more like the gentleman who's one of the stars of it, who I'm blanking on his name, who said his offspring didn't really pay any attention, Dion. Yeah, and it was just kind of, you're like, just kind of kept hitting us with more stuff.
That's Rabbi Jonah mentioned it earlier. That's the sacrifice, right? This isn't. You can't romanticize the work, right? And so I can't think of her name. One of the main characters who ended up in a divorce, Helene and Dion. So yeah, can I just add one little?
We're just getting ready.
Oh, we have time for a few questions? Oh, okay, I'm sorry. In the back with your hand up.
Sorry, I didn't mean to.
Hi, I can speak loudly if you want, or if there's a microphone coming up. I'm Cheryl Kagan. I'm a Montgomery County native, K-12 public schools. And I have two questions.
It's on.
Now it is, thank you. Nope.
Nice and loud.
Two questions. First, I first heard about this from Senator Gwen Britt, and I'm curious to know why you didn't lift her up at all. In this, she was on screen so much, and she was such a shero, and that's how I first heard about it. And it was talked about in the Senate. There's been artwork and photos, and there are ways that Gwen Britt is honored. So that's my first question. The second question is, this sold out so fast. Every night sold out so fast. And we're all still here because we want to learn, and it feels like it's important for us to educate others. I'm wondering, Ms. Trachtman, what are your plans to make sure that this movie gets a broader audience so that lots of students and community leaders of all faiths and all backgrounds are able to see this and learn?
I love these. Better now. Okay, so first about Gwen Britt, I'll tell you, the reason that Gwen Britt is not a character in the film is because I started too late. Because I started the film in 2014 and Gwen Britt was already dead. And I so regret that. I so regret that. I didn't learn about the story of how Glen Echo was integrated, which is my bad because I grew up going to Glen Echo my whole life. But I didn't learn about it until 2014, and I did not have the opportunity to interview Gwen. And unfortunately, Gwen didn't leave writings behind like Lawrence Henry did, and nobody recorded Gwen in interviews. And let me tell you, I looked hard for radio interviews, for anything that I could find. If I had had a fraction, if I had something of her voice, she would have been featured in the film. And that is unfortunately, again, like the exigencies of documentary filmmaking, because she absolutely is a shero, and she would have been a main character, no, hands down, no question. And we can talk about that till the cows come home. I can tell you about her sister, but that's... plans for the film, thank you. I mean, I've been just so gratified by the reaction to the film in Washington, and I think maybe one of the greatest honors of my life is it won a Best Documentary Feature at the DC Black Film Festival. I say that because obviously I'm a white Jewish woman, and I was incredibly humbled before the task of telling this story. My editor, who is as responsible for what's on the screen as I am, is African American, and our checks and balances with each other inform every single creative decision. I mean, the most tedious things, even music cues, is as a result of our kind of not wrestling, but just pouring our backgrounds into it.
Is there a rupture now in the Black-Jewish relationship?
Oh my God, I love her so much. Absolutely not. But, so, I have a lot of dreams for this film. It is having a festival life. It's gonna be traveling around the country. If you wanna tell people about it, you can find out where the screenings are next on our website, which is ain'tnoback.com. Coming up is Gary, Indiana, St. Louis, Boston, and Teaneck, New Jersey. Those are the next ones. I want the film to be used in schools as another way to teach the civil rights movement. I want people to understand that the civil rights movement wasn't just the I have a dream, and it wasn't just, John Lewis and Ruby Bridges and Abraham Joshua Heschel, that it was actually the vast majority were people who didn't go to Selma. We don't ever learn that, and so we don't ever understand how we have agency. I would like the film to be used to what Reverend Douglas Brown is talking about. Brown Douglas is talking about as a flint to start the conversations. Because when we were having our prep for this, what came out was that in 1960 it was illegal for us to swim in a swimming pool together. But the people on this picket line could spend hours and days getting to know each other. And today, I feel like we can swim in a swimming pool together, but it is very, very difficult to have the conversations.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and so, in a way, this movie is, talking about reparations, like, that is incredible, but for a lot of people, it's gonna need to start a lot more gently.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, and so, so I hope this movie gets used as a tool to spark, especially dialogue between synagogues and black churches. And then the other thing that I'm starting to develop right now is I've been reading about how badly sort of on the national level we teach the civil rights movement, and I have this dream of doing a tour and doing screenings in the 10 states that teach it the worst. So anyway, so those are some of my plans. But if you're connected to film festivals, or even better yet, to like a place like the Avalon or AFI, like tell them to program the film, because I just feel bad for all the people that wanted to see it that can't. So.
Thank you.
One more question.
I've been thinking a lot about when I rode the merry-go-round with her, and I guess it was the 40th reunion
Yeah.
that we got together.
Yes.
And we spent the afternoon talking, and I have some very, very firm memories. Like one of the things that's interesting to me is that was the first time she'd ever been back
That's right.
in the merry-go-round, because it was too painful
That's right.
for her to come back to that space. But the memory that stays with me the longest, and you may be able to find something on it, was the way she died. It was an old Jim Crow's murder almost. I'm being cautious with the word, but her husband had her at the hospital, I think it was at PG County, and he was trying to get help for her. She was having difficulty breathing, and he couldn't get help for her. And the next thing, it was like a couple hours later, she just expired. And I think it's important for people to know that's our neighborhood. And it happens all the time. And for me, the two things come together. It's a life absolutely wasted, because I don't know if it could have been saved, but there was a good chance of it. And I don't know if you're aware of the story or not.
I know I've heard different things about it, and I certainly can't in any way speak authoritatively about it, but absolutely we lost a giant when we lost Gwen Britt. So yeah, thank you. And I'm so glad that she's been brought up in this room. So thank you both. And I also want to just lift something else up, which you alluded to, is the reason that I knew about this. The reason I didn't know about it is a whole other problem, but the reason that I knew about it is because I was lucky enough to be at Glen Echo Park with my then fiance, and we ran into a park ranger named Sam Swirsky, who's here, and Sam told me the story, but most importantly, Sam had been working at the park for many years, I don't know how many years, decades, and had over time, people had come and told him their stories about the integration of the park and about the segregation of the park. And Sam had the idea, like, let's have a reunion of the protesters. And he was the original person who tracked down so many people and brought them together, many of whom, the African Americans, had never been in the park since. And people like Dion, Dion went on to the Freedom Rides. He had much bigger fish to fry. Glen Echo was so far from his mind, and it was because Sam found as many people as he could and brought them together. And in, was it 2000, Sam? 2005. And so I met Sam in 2009. So in 2005 that Sam created this reunion, and it also got some nice coverage in the Washington Post. But that was the whole reason that I even learned about this story. So I mean, there's a long train of people taking a stand and lifting up a story. So.
Well, we really appreciate you coming and staying with us, and thank you to